Hello and welcome to the channel. It is I, Chris, with a K. I hope you're well. So I'd like to draw your attention to a clip that is gaining attention online, and it's a clip from a reform meeting. Now obviously this would be prior to the elections, but it's gaining attention online because it asks the questions that cut directly into one of the biggest political debates in Britain today. Who actually governs this country? The exchange is between a member of the public, Claire Dyer, and Reform UK's Richard Tice, discussing the World Economic Forum, the WHO, Brexit, and sovereignty, and whether political parties are tied into what many of us would describe as global agendas. Now, regardless of where you stand politically, the reason why this conversation is resonating with so many people is because millions of people increasingly feel disconnected from the institutions making decisions over their lives. So first, let's watch the opening half of the exchange.
Richard, so they demonstrated earlier that reform and all the candidates are made up of freedom fighters, and that essentially this is what we are as freedom fighters, and that is true. A lot of people are from essentially a freedom movement, a truth movement, and the one thing that these people have in common is the fact that we believe that there is a global agenda that a lot of countries have signed up to. The main giveaway with Keir Starmer was when he was elected. He stated in an interview that his allegiance, his alliance was to Davos.
Let us just ask you quickly, you have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Because Westminster is too constrained.
Not Westminster. There is an argument, a divisive argument and division amongst people within the freedom movement that reform are part of that global agenda. So I'm going to ask the question, but it's also a statement that is argued daily. Is reform signed up to the World Economic Forum?
A great question. The answer is no. And we've been very clear that also the World Health Organization, again, is a terrible organisation. And at the end of the day, advisors advise, directors or ministers decide. So, people can give advice. You can have a forum around London that advises on stuff. Fine, share best practice. But ultimately, we talk about being a sovereign, independent nation. That's what Brexit was all about, taking back control of our sovereignty. That's why I talk about a British sovereign wealth fund, which will be one of the top 8 in the world, backing British companies, backing British products, promoting British products, and building British affordable homes for British citizens. So
now, there's really two major issues being discussed there. The first is sovereignty. Claire raises a concern shared by many people within what we would broadly call the freedom movement. The belief that governments increasingly operate within international frameworks shaped by organisations like the World Economic Forum and the WHO. Richard Tice responds by rejecting the idea that Reform UK is connected to the World Economic Forum, while also criticising the World Health Organization and emphasising national sovereignty. And that word, sovereignty, is really the key theme running through this entire conversation, because Brexit was fundamentally sold as taking back control over borders, control over laws, and control over national decision making. The UK government and the WHO both publicly state that the pandemic agreement does not override British sovereignty and cannot legally impose lockdowns or mandates. But critics argue that influence isn't always about direct legal control. Political pressure, financial systems, media coordination, and international agreements can heavily shape domestic policy. The second major point that Tice raises is the economic independence through a British sovereign wealth fund. The idea of investing into British companies, British infrastructure, British products and affordable homes. And this isn't some radical fantasy. Countries like Norway already operate enormous sovereign wealth funds built around long-term national investment. And honestly, that's why these kind of conversations resonate with people. Many feel Britain no longer prioritises productive national growth. Instead, they see rising debt, foreign ownership, housing pressures, increasing dependence on international finance, and you cannot buy a rubber dinghy for love or money anywhere. But now let's hear the second part of Richard Tice's response, because this is where the conversation shifts towards unity, division and political strategy.
I think our language is loud and clear on that. Inevitably, our enemies, of course, they're going to talk a whole load of nonsense, whether they're from the hard left or from any other end of the political spectrum. We just keep focusing on what we're doing, keep the faith, keep the courage, ignore the opponents, and actually the proof's in the pudding. We've led in, I think, give or take, 250 polls. And that's because actually we talk the language of common sense, with conviction, with passion, with belief. And look, are we perfect? No, real people in the real world, taking decisions, taking risks. Of course, sometimes things don't work out as you'd ideally like. Christ, it'd be really boring if we were all the same, wouldn't it? I mean, we all love a good debate, and that's who we are. But the other key thing in messaging terms is, when you're elected and when you're running councils, as a group of reform councillors, have your discussion, your debate, your argument behind closed doors. And then ultimately, you have to make a decision. The boss has to make a decision of your reform group. And then when you leave that room, go out and sell it as a united team. Because as you know, in the world of football, whichever football team you support, teams of 11 individuals that play as a team win matches and win leagues. If you have a team of 11 individuals who play as individuals and who don't support each other and back each other up and help each other up when the chips are down, you lose matches, and that's when we lose votes, and that's when we lose councillors and lose councils. So that would be my implore to you all. Work at stuff behind closed doors and then go and sell it as a united team. Even if you might think, well, that wasn't quite me, but once the decision's been made, you've got to go in perfection.
So honestly, the football analogy that Richard Tice uses is probably the strongest political point in the entire exchange, because almost every movement struggles from the same problem: internal division, arguments, factionalism, personal disputes, people who broadly agree on major issues turning against each other on the smaller disagreements. Now, Tice's point is that the debate should happen internally, but once decisions are made, movements need to operate publicly as a united team if they want to win politically. And whether viewers support Reform UK or not, the broader issue behind this clip is undeniable. Public distrust in institutions is growing rapidly. People increasingly question who shapes policy, who benefits economically, and whether or not democratic governments still primarily answer to their own citizens. Now, to be balanced, not every international institution represents some sort of hidden conspiracy, and not every international agreement means sovereignty disappears overnight. But equally, dismissing all public concern as irrational clearly hasn't helped either, because conversations like this continue to spread for one reason: they tap directly into public concerns around sovereignty, accountability, economic dependence, and democratic control. So I will leave you with one final question. Are global institutions helping nations cooperate, or are democratic governments slowly becoming administrators inside a much larger international system? Comments below, subscribe if you're new, hit the notification bell because none of you do, and as always, keep the faith, keep the courage, and stay sovereign. See you in the next one.